The following program is an original production of WICC PBS Chicago.
We are down to the wire in the close and contentious battle for governor, with no clear frontrunner in sight.
Pensions, jobs, the minimum wage, taxes, and even the Ebola virus are among the hotly debated topics as Pat Quinn and Bruce Rauner wrap up the most expensive and negative campaign in the state's history.
Tonight, our panel of experts weighs in on the candidates, the issues, and the odds. That and much more ahead on In the Loop.
Good evening. I'm Chris Bury.
And I'm Barbara Pinto. With just 5 days to go, the race for Illinois governor could be one of the closest in state history.
Recent polls show Governor Pat Quinn and Republican nominee Bruce Rauner locked in a dead heat as campaign spending soars and attack ads blanket the airwaves.
Tonight, a closer look at the men, their messages, and the last-minute appeal to voters.
Another day, another political scandal for Governor Quinn.
First Blagojevich, now Quinn. Can we afford 4 more years?
Bruce Rauner, he refuses to take responsibility for bankruptcies, corruption, FBI investigations, and Medicaid fraud.
They've shattered campaign spending records and battered each other with a seemingly endless barrage of attack ads. Governor Pat Quinn and Republican challenger Bruce Rauner spent a record $35 million combined in the past 3 months alone. $21 million on those blistering ads on radio and TV. The incumbent governor and the billionaire businessman remained locked in a down-to-the-wire dead heat, pummeling each other at every turn. This exchange from their final debate.
Pat Quinn has failed. You've been a failure. Suffering brutally high crime. You've been a failure.
That's what billionaires do. Savage cuts. I'm running against a billionaire. Savage cuts. Savage, radical, extreme cuts.
Despite the state's dismal finances and $100 billion pension crisis, personal attacks and scandals have dominated the headlines. Governor Quinn's Neighborhood Recovery Initiative is under federal investigation, and a federal monitor will oversee hiring at the State Department of Transportation after allegations of patronage. Bruce Rauner's campaign was stung by questions about his business dealings and the resignation of Chicago Sun-Times political reporter Dave McKinney, who said he was retaliated against for writing about a lawsuit containing allegations Rauner threatened a female employee. University of Illinois in Chicago political science professor Dick Simpson says the focus on negativity instead of the issues could backfire.
Problems of Illinois are pretty great, and voters aren't sure whether to assign the blame to the governor or to assign the blame elsewhere, but they aren't happy with the economic conditions, they're not happy with the schools, they're not happy with the crime, so that makes it difficult in a re-election.
Voter Alberto Barraza is unhappy with both campaigns.
I would like to hear more about their conclusions or what they have come up with, their plans, rather than them just always targeting each other and bashing each other over the radio and on TV ads.
Among the core campaign issues, raising the minimum wage. A Chicago Tribune poll shows 69% of state residents support Governor Quinn's plan to raise the minimum to more than $10 an hour.
We're hurting our economy by having a minimum wage above the national. We've got to move back to the national.
Bruce Rauner was initially against a pay hike before he changed his mind, but only if it comes with pro-business reforms.
The real policies we need in place is not just to raise the minimum wage, which I support, but it's more important that we create an economic opportunity so families can rise beyond the minimum wage.
The best way to help the economy is to help hardworking people. Literally hundreds of thousands of people in Illinois at the minimum wage are raising families, doing hard jobs. They shouldn't have to live in poverty.
On education, both candidates agree on prioritizing spending for early childhood and higher education. On taxes, Governor Quinn plans to make the temporary 5% income tax hike permanent. Bruce Rauner opposes any raise in taxes. On pension reform, neither candidate has laid out specifically how they'd solve the state's crisis. Pat Quinn favors pension cuts. Bruce Rauner opposes them, calling instead to move public workers' retirement funds to 401k-type plans. African American voters delivered a narrow win for Governor Quinn 4 years ago and will again be key in this race. Bruce Rauner, who has long funded charter schools and charities in African American communities, has worked to chip away at the governor's support.
Well, minorities are critical, particularly for Pat Quinn. He needs especially to get a heavy African American vote and a reasonable vote of the Latino community. And the Latino community particularly is a little turned off because Obama hasn't come through with immigration reform. So it's a challenge. If he gets blacks and Latinos to vote, he'll probably win the election.
In another closely watched and heated race,
Dick Durbin's been in Washington for 32 years, putting millions in his own pocket.
I believe that for Dick Durbin, it's not about politics. He cares for veterans and their families.
longtime U.S. Senator Dick Durbin, the second highest-ranking Democrat in the Senate, is being challenged by state senator and businessman Jim Oberweis. Oberweis won a state Senate seat 2 years ago after 6 failed campaigns for U.S. Senate, Congress, and governor. Both faced off in an ABC7 debate last week.
A good political campaign really focuses on the future, and that's what we need to discuss this evening. Primarily the future of working families across the state of Illinois.
I'll offer a different way forward, a way to look at how to create more jobs and better paying jobs, a way to help get our kids a better education through better schools.
A recent Chicago Tribune poll shows Senator Durbin with a substantial 14-point lead over his opponent. Professor Simpson says, don't expect an upset.
Oberweis has not made a compelling campaign. He's very far behind and will lose.
With Senator Durbin apparently headed for another term, all eyes are now on the governor's race. Here's Chris with more on that.
Thanks, Barbara. Tonight we're joined by Matt Dietrich, executive editor for Reboot Illinois, Anthony Anderson, chairman, Republican Precinct Project, and Delmarie Cobb, consultant for the public affairs and political consulting firm The Publicity Works. Hello and welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
So this governor's race could not be any tighter. Let's take a look at the Real Clear Politics average of the very latest polls. It has Quinn right at 45%, Rauner just 0.3 of 1 percentage point behind him, well within the margin of error. Matt, with only a few days left, what's the key to this election?
I think the key for both candidates is voter turnout. Governor Quinn and the Democrats in Illinois have done their absolute best to make sure that they can drive Democratic voters to the polls. They've put on ballot questions on raising the minimum wage, on imposing a millionaire tax. We have a couple of constitutional amendments that were placed on the ballot largely to drive the Democratic vote. For the Republicans, for Rauner, they have to look back to 2010 and realize that one of the main reasons, probably the reason why Bill Brady lost to Pat Quinn by less than 1 percentage point, by under 32,000 votes, is that they didn't get Republicans to the polls. All they would have had to do is win something like 4 or 5 more votes per precinct statewide, and the Republicans could have had the governorship in 2010. So turnout is critical for both parties, and that's the big mystery, is how will it turn out?
And Anthony, we heard the political science professor and former alderman Dick Simpson say in the setup report that he thinks this negative advertising, and we've seen so much of it, is going to drive down turnout. Does that help or hurt the candidate you support, Bruce Rauner?
It would hurt turnout insofar as I'm concerned, because the Democrats, they're going to rely on the African-American vote. And if that African-American vote doesn't come to fruition, then it's going to be paying to pay, because right now it's about 15% statewide African-Americans are polling for Bruce Rauner candidacy. And that's not too good coming for an incumbent governor. If he doesn't shore up his base by the African-American vote, it can be curtains for this governor come next week.
Delmarie, what do you think this negative barrage of advertising, will it suppress turnout that's helpful to Quinn or to Rauner?
Well, I really think at this point everybody realizes how close this race is. So even though there's been a barrage of negative campaigning and all of us are tired of it right about now, I think that it's critical and people understand that they cannot really sit on the sidelines in this particular election.
Matt, you talked about that 2010 race. Let's take a look at that turnout for governor. As you said, Quinn barely beat Bill Brady. Only half of the registered voters in Illinois, 51%, turned out. Why would this race be any different?
You know, I've asked myself the same question, and yet this race to me seems so different than any other gubernatorial race that we've seen for as long as I can remember. We have never had a candidate like Bruce Rauner. He comes from outside the Republican political system. Bill Brady in 2010 was one of the it's my turn to run type candidates, and that's the way it's been done for years and years and years. This year, with Bruce Rauner on the ballot, you have an outsider, you have all these issues being brought up about his wealth, how he made his money, his vociferous anti-union stance. And on the other side, you have Pat Quinn. You could not have a more polar opposite candidate going, or two candidates going against each other. That's why I think, you know, if we can't get a higher voter turnout this year than the, 51% that we've been getting recently, I don't know what is going to get people to vote in these off-year elections.
The irony seems to be that while the turnout may be low, the spending has never been higher. They're on track to spend $100 million, twice what has ever been spent before in Illinois. Del Murray, what are your thoughts about just the level of spending?
It's really been obscene, the amount of money that's been raised and spent for political ads. That was really the question up front. Would Quinn be able to compete with Rauner in the spending department as far as ads are concerned? And the fact that he has been able to compete bodes well for him. What's unfortunate is I spent yesterday calling all the black media here in Chicago to see how much money had been spent with them. And the Rauner camp has not spent any money with black media other than WVON in terms of black-owned media. And so, if you've seen that the pathway to victory is through the African-American community, when you're spending $59 million in campaign ads, you would think you could spend $10,000 a week with black media.
And Rauner is putting in about $26 million of his own money, Anthony. What is your thought about that? Does that suggest that someone can, in fact, buy an election?
Well, I don't know if it's so much as buying an election, Chris, but I think Rauner has taken a look at what it would take to win an election. And Rauner knows that, in order to win this election, he's going to need the black vote, which Republicans, for the most part, have not went after. And he's going to have to I guess, go into the communities that traditionally Republicans haven't been inside. And so if there's a means to an end, he would have to spend this much money or more just to break even with the Democrat in the state of Illinois. And moving forward, he has made some substantial gains in some of the communities, but it's still going to take a lot more. These are some deposits that need to be made in the past, and moving forward in the future, hopefully Rauner or any other Republican in the state of Illinois will be able to make some withdrawals, some meaningful withdrawals, moving forward from these different elections.
Has Rauner made enough of an attempt in the African-American community?
Oh, absolutely. If you look at some of the leadership in the black community, it's been a long time since I've seen a lot of the African-American ministers, a lot of the black activists in some of these communities on the west and south sides that have stepped up and said, hey, listen, we're going to work with this Republican in Rauner because we can't do the same. We can't have the status quo because it's not serving our communities the way they should. I mean, in all these other communities throughout the state of Illinois and throughout Cook County, we see that, candidates, for the most part, they're addressing issues and concerns as it relates to those communities. But when it comes to the black community, candidates have just been nowhere to be seen. And so therefore, yes, absolutely, Rauner has made some gains in these communities that traditionally have been rough grounds for Republicans.
And I think it's good that this is a competitive race in that the black community is up for grabs, because the African-American community traditionally is the margin of victory. And obviously, Rauner, when he decided to sit down and look at how could he win this race, he looked at where Quinn won and where Quinn lost. And Quinn won because of the African-American community. Those communities, Madison County, Cook County, those were the two counties where he won. And so that was a strategy, but I don't see a commitment. I see a strategy for Rauner, but I don't see a commitment to the African-American community. And I think there's been a lot of opportunities where he could have said, here I am. I'm not here just because I'm trying to win. I'm here because I really believe that we can make a difference to the African-American community.
What about the support that was just mentioned about the pastors, Corey Brooks and others, who are now supporting Rauner very publicly.
Well, they are supporting Rauner, and I agree with the growing sentiment that the African American church should not be up for sale, in that the only churches you see where politicians come in and get an opportunity to go on the pulpit and the altar is the black church. And I'm really against it because it's becoming a joke almost.
Why is that?
Because there's no other church. I'm Catholic. No one's going to come into the Catholic Church and go on the altar and sing and dance and clap hands. People who've never been to the church before, have no relationship to the church or the community, will be allowed that kind of stage or forum. And so it is becoming a joke. There's a reason why the black church has the level of respect that it has traditionally. It's been because during slavery, when there was no other place for African Americans to go to or no other person to speak out, it was the black church and the black minister. So to use this like this now, in this day and age, is very condescending in many ways.
But I think traditionally, though, if you look at the way things work, politicians know that for the most part, the people in their community have a direct relationship with that pastor or with that activist. So therefore, it only makes sense from a business perspective to go into the church to try to address some issues where they can at least reach the largest audience. And where else can you do that outside of going on the street corner?
Another important voting bloc in this election is going to be women. And Matt, some polls suggest that Bruce Rauner has made inroads with women, which traditionally the last few elections have been a very Democratic constituency.
Mm-hmm. And also, and specifically, suburban women are going to be key because they tend to vote, they're going to be key in making that difference. Now, so far, Quinn has been leading in the polling among women, but as we've said, what does polling matter when you're literally in a virtual tie?
Well,
Anthony?
I looked at some of the polls just yesterday, and they had Rauner moving up by 17%, and with the Chicago suburban Cook County voters for women votes. So I don't know. It's a big swing that there was from the beginning of the month to right now in terms of women moving their support from a Quinn to a Bruce Rauner. And why is that? I guess most people want to feel safe in terms of their employment. They want to feel safe in terms of job security, and they want to have a reasonable. I guess they want to have reasonable ways to live, I guess, but for the most part, they don't feel secure with Pat Quinn, and that may be the case why they're shifting from a Pat Quinn to a Bruce Rauner. Whether or not he can provide that security that they're looking for would be another story.
But the difference is white women have one set of issues and African American women have another set of issues. They're not the same issues. When you look at the issues that Bruce Rauner is supporting, he was against the minimum wage. He's only for a minimum wage now because it's politically expedient to be, but it's with caveats. And the caveats are to create an economic opportunity for businesses to grow, not necessarily for people to grow. African American women are in these low-paying service-oriented jobs. He's anti-union. African American women, when you're talking about the teachers, he has funded legislation downstate to go after the Chicago Teachers Union and to expand charter schools and privatize public education. That again, African American women are the backbone of the black community. It's very different than in the white community. African American women are the workers, they're the homeowners, they are the ones who do the business. And so when you are talking about these issues that directly affect women.
You're saying a totally different constituency.
It's totally different.
One of the issues that hasn't come up much, and Matt, your organization, Reboot Illinois, has done a great job of highlighting the pension issue and the debt issue in the state of Illinois, yet it's been absent from this campaign.
Well, it's been absent because it can only create big problems for both candidates when they bring it up. For Pat Quinn, he pushed through a major pension reform bill last December. That was revolutionary for Illinois. That was huge. He also, that made him public enemy number one to all the unions, who now have, they apparently have made amends, judging from the campaign finance reports. But what's happened now is the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court over the summer, in a different case, made a ruling that pretty well telegraphs that that pension reform bill may be struck down, or significant parts of it could be struck down. So
whoever is elected is still going to have this time.
Right. Now, Bruce Rauner has this idea of putting everyone into a 401k plan eventually. It's a very complicated thing. It's not something you can communicate very well in a 30-second ad. Politically, it's really not going to be very feasible. And I think, like much of what Bruce Rauner says in his campaign, you have to factor in that he's got to get all this stuff through a democratically controlled legislature, and you're just not going to have your way with Mike Madigan and John Cullerton.
Even if you're used to being a CEO.
Correct.
We have a wild card in this race, too, and that is a libertarian candidate named Chad Grimm. He's polling around 4%. Del Marie, enough to make a difference in this race?
Well, it is enough to make a difference in a race this tight. And, you know, I don't know, the unions gave him some money, and I don't know if that was necessarily the wisest thing to do. I know the thinking is that that will pull votes from Rauner. He could pull votes from Rauner, but you really don't know where he's pulling the votes. And if I had some money to give to somebody, I would give it to them for boots on the ground, because that's really what's going to have to happen on Election Day, is getting people out to the polls.
I think with the amount of money that's being given to Chad Grimm, it's almost nominal at best. I mean, Chad Grimm, if he gets 5%, he'll be thanking God at that point. But the fact of the matter is, I think the unions have saw that, hey, listen, we better give this candidate $30,000 now, as opposed to wait until, let's see, either candidate, let's say Rauner wins this election come next week, and they say, well, now we're going to spend 10 times as much in court fighting this guy on every issue that's near and dear to us. So if you look at it from that standpoint, they're trying to hedge their bets so we don't have to fight this guy in court.
Well, it's interesting that the money from the operating engineers, that union is also a big supporter of Pat Quinn. So it telegraphs what they're thinking.
Right. And again, Chris, I think they're looking, you know, you're learning from history here. You go back 4 years, all it would have taken was 32,000 more votes. If you can just shave that tiny little bit amount, that tiny little bit of voters away from the Republican candidate, you could see a repeat this year.
We have another election we have to talk about a little bit here. U.S. Senator Dick Durbin, the majority whip in the U.S. Senate, seeking his 4th term. Let's check out the Real Clear Politics average. We see a comfortable 12 to 15-point lead. 13-point is the consensus over Jim Oberweis. And Del Marie, why has Oberweis failed to gain any traction against Dick Durbin?
Well, I looked at the debate, and he's just clearly hasn't done his homework. He was not up to par with somebody who's been in Congress for 30 years. So if you're talking about a professional politician, he's a professional politician, Durbin is, and he knows the issues. So you at least have to do your homework so that you can get the consideration of people. And if he's a professional politician, then Oberweis is a professional candidate at this point, because he runs all the time.
Anthony, not ready for prime time?
I can't
You're a Republican.
I can't disagree with that fact. I mean, nothing can be further from the truth. I mean, Oberweis has ran in 12 different races. He's running for every race but dog catcher at this point. And he's been, for the most part, unsuccessful. I mean, you just ran for state representative 2 years ago. Now you're ready for the big league, United States Senator. You're out of your league. Oberweis, stick to the ice cream. You'll be okay.
Interesting from a Republican. Matt, game over here.
The truth is the truth.
Well, Oberweis has the problem of, for one, he's going against a very, very, very popular and strong candidate. You just have to look at Dick Durbin. I think no matter who was running against him would have a tough time. He's just very popular in Illinois. He's a leader in the Senate. He's outspoken. Sometimes that's gotten him into a little bit of trouble, being outspoken, but I think that his supporters in Illinois really like that about him. He voted against, you know, his vote against the Iraq War. That's going to be a big part of his, when you write the biography of Dick Durbin, that'll be a big thing, and I think that still resonates with people.
We're just about out of time. Lightning round here very quickly. In the governor's race, 10 seconds each, your projections for Election Day. Del Marie.
Well, certainly as a Democrat, I'm hoping that Governor Quinn wins. I think it's going to be very close, as we all know, and I think based on what Attorney General said yesterday, we're going to have a late night.
Anthony, quickly.
This election is going to hinge. It's going to be a barn burner, but I think it's going to be rounded by probably half a percentage point, simply because he's starting to get the black vote, and the base is coming out to vote.
Very last word, Matt.
I can't make a prediction, but we're not going to know until early in the morning.
That's the easy
next
way out.
Wednesday.
That's the easy way out.
Well, on that note, we have to end it. Thank you so much. Thanks to our guests, Matt Dietrich, Anthony Anderson, and Delmarie Cobb. And while we're talking politics, one former Illinois politician has launched a new career in business. She made history as the first woman from Illinois elected to the U.S. Senate, and now she's turned her political skills to a new passion of delivering healthy food and drinks to consumers in Chicago and across the country.
We hope to win 50% of the vote on February 22nd. So we're working hard to become the next mayor.
Carol Moseley Braun has retreated from politics after finishing fourth behind Rahm Emanuel in the 2011 mayor's race. Before that, Braun had a varied political career, becoming the first African-American woman elected to the U.S. Senate. After losing her re-election attempt in 1998, she served as ambassador to New Zealand in the Clinton administration. Braun also made a brief and unsuccessful bid for the Democratic nomination for president in 2004. Since she left politics, Braun has turned her attention to running a Chicago business, Good Food Organics, that is about to celebrate its 10th anniversary.
It was really quite natural for me to start this company and to get involved with providing healthy beverages and healthy food alternatives, because that really is my passion. So much of what people eat and drink these days is killing them. I mean, there's so many pollutants and so much garbage in our food supply.
Her Ambassador Organics line includes products such as coffee, cocoa, tea, and olive oil. In her transition from public office to the private sector, Braun says she adapted lessons learned during her time in government to help deliver a message about the importance of healthy eating.
I've been making policy all these years in food and agriculture. As a state legislator, I had a lot of occasion to go throughout Illinois to work with colleagues from farming communities to get into those issues. And then as a senator, as United States Senator, I was the first woman on the Senate Finance Committee. And so because I was on finance, a lot of the Farm Bill deliberations and issues about trade and policy came through there. And of course, agriculture is a big part of that.
Good Food Organics is located on Chicago's South Side, in a community where a lack of good grocery stores has often made finding healthy choices difficult for many residents. Braun sees food inequality in Chicago and across the country that mirrors the growing gap in incomes between rich and poor.
I would hate to see America become a country with a twofold food supply. You know, food for the wealthy who can afford not to kill themselves, but what they eat and drink, and then food for poor people and everybody else who eat whatever is put in front of them and whatever is available to them. We can't afford to let our country go down that path.
After a lengthy career in the public and private sectors, Carol Moseley Braun is enjoying what she calls her fourth career, still serving the community, she says, by helping people lead a healthier life.
This was supposed to have been my retirement plan. Not real smart. I work 7 days a week. This is hardly retired, but I'm having a ball. I'm having a good time with it.
Well, that does it for this week's show. I'm Chris Bury.
And I'm Barbara Pinto. Good night.
Good night.